The airport was crowded and noisy, with people rushing to and from their gates, dragging suitcases behind them. Families chattered excitedly, business travelers typed on laptops, and children tugged at their parents' hands. Among all this, George and Margaret sat quietly on a row of seats near the boarding area. They looked like any ordinary elderly couple, simple, neat clothes, nothing fancy. George wore a worn-out jacket, and Margaret had a soft scarf wrapped around her neck. Their faces were gentle and calm, showing years of hard work and quiet strength. They didn't say much, just held hands, and watched the hustle around them. Not far away, Brittany, a young woman in her 20s, stood talking loudly with her friend. She was dressed in a bright designer coat, perfectly styled hair, and expensive shoes. Brittany laughed in a sharp, cutting way as she pointed toward George and Margaret. "Look at them," Brittany said, loud enough for others to hear. "They probably can't even afford a proper flight. Too poor to fly first class, for sure." Her friend giggled nervously, glancing around to see if anyone was listening. Some nearby travelers stopped and turned their heads, their eyes flicking between Brittany and the elderly couple. A few frowned, uncomfortable with Brittany's words. George and Margaret didn't react. They stayed calm, their eyes soft but steady, but the air around them felt heavy, as if Brittany's words had cast a shadow over the busy terminal. No one said a thing yet, but something was about to happen that none of them expected. The flight was delayed, making everyone restless. People checked their watches and tapped their phones, murmuring complaints. The loudspeaker announced the new boarding time, and the crowd sighed, some rolling their eyes. Brittany stood again, brushing a stray hair from her face, still sneering at George and Margaret. "I mean seriously, who flies economy anymore?" she said to her friend. "They probably begged for charity or something." Margaret quietly helped a young mother nearby struggling with a baby stroller. George smiled kindly at a tired child holding a stuffed animal. Even as Brittany made her rude comments, the elderly couple stayed calm, their gentle actions quietly catching the attention of a few passengers. "Maybe they're just pretending to be poor to get free stuff," Brittany whispered loudly, her voice dripping with judgment, but George and Margaret said nothing. They sat patiently, hands folded, their faces showing quiet dignity. The entire terminal buzzed with tension, Brittany's snide remarks against the couple's peaceful calm. A flight attendant walked by, greeting some passengers. She glanced at George and Margaret with a warm smile. A few people nearby noticed the kindness in her eyes and began to wonder if there was more to the couple than met the eye. As boarding was announced, Brittany pushed to the front, trying to get ahead of others. "First class, here I come," she muttered, smirking. But George and Margaret waited their turn, steady and composed. The stage was set, but the real story was about to unfold, surprising everyone watching. George and Margaret's story was one not many people knew. They had been married for over 50 years, sharing a lifetime of memories that went far beyond their simple clothes and quiet smiles. Years ago, George worked as a mechanic in a small-town garage. His hands were rough from decades of fixing cars, but his heart was always gentle. Margaret had spent her days teaching children at the local school. They weren't rich by any means, but they had a life full of love, hard work, and small joys. They raised 3 children, working late hours to make sure there was food on the table and shoes on their kids' feet. Vacations were rare, and flying had been something they only dreamed about. Most of their lives were spent saving pennies, never imagining a plane trip could be part of their story. This flight was different. Their granddaughter Lily had secretly planned a surprise. She had worked for the airline for a few years and wanted to give her grandparents a special gift for their 50th wedding anniversary, their very first airplane trip. George and Margaret had no idea. To them, this was just a simple trip to visit family across the country. They didn't expect luxury or special treatment, just the chance to see their loved ones again. As they waited in the busy airport, neither spoke of their excitement or nerves. They sat quietly, holding hands, grateful for the moment. Behind their calm faces were hearts full of hope and a lifetime of resilience. Brittany's harsh words echoed around them, but George and Margaret knew something she didn't. This trip was about so much more than money or appearances. It was about love, respect, and a family's way of saying, "You matter." At last, the boarding announcement echoed through the terminal. People stood up, gathering their belongings and moving toward the gate. Brittany immediately pushed her way toward the front, flashing her boarding pass with an air of entitlement. First class, of course, she whispered loudly to her friend, smirking. George and Margaret stood slowly, taking their time as they joined the line with quiet patience. They didn't rush or complain, their gentle smiles stayed steady, even as Brittany shot them sharp glances. As the flight attendant began scanning boarding passes, a hush fell over the crowd. She called out names and numbers with a calm professional tone. When it was George and Margaret's turn, she smiled warmly, and motioned for them to step aside. The murmurs began immediately. Passengers nearby exchanged confused looks, whispering questions to each other. Brittany's smirk deepened, certain she knew what was happening. They're probably being kicked off for looking suspicious, she whispered loudly enough for a few to hear, a cruel satisfaction in her voice. But the flight attendant shook her head gently. No, not at all. Please wait here, she said kindly, leading George and Margaret toward the front of the plane. Brittany's eyes widened in disbelief, her smug attitude faltering. What's going on? Why are they getting special treatment? She hissed. The crew didn't answer her, but their smiles told a different story, one of respect and quiet celebration. The other passengers started to take notice. Whispers turned into curious glances. Some even smiled, watching as the elderly couple walked confidently toward the first-class section. For a moment, Brittany was speechless, caught off guard by the unexpected turn of events. The story was no longer just about a rude comment in the airport. It had turned into something much bigger, a lesson in kindness, humility, and the surprising power of true respect. George and Margaret stepped aboard the plane, guided by the flight attendant toward the front, where the first-class seats awaited. Brittany, still standing near the economy entrance, watched in disbelief as the elderly couple disappeared into the luxurious cabin. Her lips tightened, eyes narrowing with confusion and frustration. Passengers nearby whispered among themselves, curiosity growing. Why were these simple-looking seniors getting special treatment? Some shook their heads, remembering Brittany's earlier cruel remarks. A few gave George and Margaret knowing smiles, as if recognizing something more beneath the surface. Brittany marched up to a flight attendant, voice sharp and demanding. "Excuse me, why are they getting first class? They don't belong there. This isn't fair." The attendant stayed calm, her voice gentle but firm. "They've been upgraded, ma'am. It's a gift from their family, to honor them." Brittany scoffed. "What, just because they're old? That's not a reason." The attendant's eyes didn't waver. "They earned it." Sometimes true worth isn't about money or appearance. The words hung in the air. Brittany stumbled back, unable to argue. She returned to her seat, surrounded by the less comfortable reality of economy class, cramped seats, flickering screens, and limited snacks. Meanwhile, George and Margaret settled into their spacious seats, surprised but grateful. Soft blankets, warm smiles from the crew, and a quiet comfort they had never imagined awaited them. A kind passenger nearby leaned over and whispered, "Your granddaughter must be very proud. This is such a wonderful surprise." Margaret's eyes shimmered with tears. "We didn't expect any of this," she said softly. "We're just happy to be here." The cabin buzzed with warmth and respect, a stark contrast to the cold words Brittany had thrown earlier. This wasn't just an upgrade in seats, it was an upgrade in dignity, love, and recognition. As the plane cruised high above the clouds, a gentle hush settled over the cabin. Passengers whispered quietly, many casting warm glances toward George and Margaret in first class. The story had spread quickly, how a kind granddaughter, Lily, had secretly arranged this special upgrade for her grandparents' 50th wedding anniversary. Lily worked for the airline's customer service team. She had seen firsthand how hard her grandparents had worked all their lives. She knew they never flew first class before, and she wanted to give them a moment of joy, a memory they would cherish forever. A flight attendant leaned in to tell the story to a curious passenger seated nearby. "Their granddaughter planned this surprise," she said softly. "She wanted to honor them for everything they've done." The passenger smiled and nodded, feeling touched. Around the cabin, passengers began to applaud quietly, moved by the unexpected gesture of love. Margaret blushed, wiping a tear from her eye. George squeezed her hand gently. Neither expected such attention, but they accepted it with humble gratitude. Meanwhile, back in economy, Brittany sat alone, her earlier confidence replaced by silence. She stared out the small window, thinking about what she had said, and how wrong she'd been. The couple's quiet dignity shone brighter than any designer clothes or flashy attitude. Their kindness, their story, and their family's love had touched everyone on the plane. Brittany tried to catch a glimpse of the first-class cabin, but the curtain blocked her view. She looked away, embarrassed. George and Margaret shared a small smile, knowing that true class isn't measured by money or status. It's measured by love, respect, and kindness, things Brittany had forgotten. The flight continued, carrying not just passengers, but a story of resilience and grace that no one on that plane would soon forget. As the plane settled into its journey, Brittany sat in her cramped economy seat. The small screen in front of her flickered, the seatbelt sign dinged, and the snack basket passed by with only a few crumbs left. She glanced toward the curtain separating first class, curiosity mixed with regret. George and Margaret, now comfortably seated with extra legroom and attentive flight attendants, shared a quiet moment. Margaret noticed Brittany peeking through the curtain, trying to catch a glimpse of their upgraded seats. Instead of anger, she gave a gentle, kind smile, one that carried no bitterness, only grace. The passengers around noticed the contrast, the young woman's bitterness against the elderly couple's quiet dignity. As the flight continued, murmurs spread among the passengers about the true meaning of class. It wasn't about money, clothes, or loud words. It was about respect, kindness, and the strength to carry oneself with humility even in the face of cruelty. Brittany remained silent, her earlier harshness replaced by a heavy weight of shame. She realized that her judgments had been shallow and unfair. George squeezed Margaret's hand and whispered, "This trip means everything to me." Margaret nodded, eyes shining. "It's about love, not wealth." The plane began its descent, and with it came a new understanding for those on board. Sometimes, the richest people are not the ones with the most money, but those with the most heart. And in the quiet hum of the airplane's engines, a lesson flew higher than any altitude. True class is earned through kindness, not dollars.